Hi! So the UI system in Godot is really powerful and really easy to get started with. Let's take a look at Godot 4. So first of all, when we're starting a scene, to create a user interface, simply enough we can click the user interface button. That said, you can attach these to other scenes. I'm gonna go into this in a moment. Let's make a user interface node for starters. So here we have our user interface marked out with the little line thingies. And it's currently technically taking up the entire screen, though we can't see anything since this is an invisible control node. Now control basically just means the default UI node that doesn't do much on its own other than have a position. You can change the position with these things. You can change how it scales on your screen with these things. I'm gonna show some examples of that later. For now, just be aware it exists. So let's see, what can we actually do with the UI? First of all, some things we probably would commonly use is buttons. Let's make a button. This gives the button some text. This is a button. Okay, we can take this button, we can move it. There it is, somewhere in the middle of our screen. And if we look here, we have the orange markers. This is the actual position of the button. So if we direct these, the button gets larger. If we move them around, the button goes to new places. That's pretty much what the orange ones do. Now the green ones control what happens if you resize a window. Let's keep it named control, that's fine. So here the button's in the center. What happens? All four of the anchors is what these are called, are attached to the upper left corner, which means if I scale up the window, the button keeps its distance and its size and everything normal and just stays attached to the upper left corner. It doesn't move away from there. If instead we take this anchor and move it all the way over here, and we resize the window now, the button gets larger to account for the more space it has now, because the button now scales from the upper left corner to the lower right corner, because that's where the anchors are. That's pretty much all you need to know to figure out how to get any UI layout done using anchors. But there are some useful things to help you. If you want to move this thing around and immediately have anchors adjust as well, you can click this. And whenever I move this stuff around, the anchors move in the same way as this stuff. That's one thing you can do. Then there are some presets. These just make it faster. You can use top wide. Let's click that. And now the button takes up the entire top and in terms of width, and that's it. You can use full rect. Makes it as large as it possibly can be. Now it takes up the entire screen. See here, button, everything here is button. If we scale this, everything is still button. It doesn't care, it's gonna keep scaling with the window. Okay, that's enough about just buttons. Buttons on their own, very nice, but we want a bit more than buttons. Let's remove the button and take a look at other control nodes. So, here, in the list of nodes we have the control section. This is where all the fun stuff happens. We can use a color rect, for example, if we just want a colored background. Do this. You can see here it's currently just in the upper left corner. We just click here on the preset, we make it a full rectangle. There we go, now the entire background is white. We don't want it to be white. We want it to be a darkish purple. There we go, it's a darkish purple now. Let's add another control node. Let's add a button that is now on top of the darkish purple thingy. Button is here. It says click me, has its own color. We can do a bit more complicated stuff. So let's just click on, let's see, where's everything? Here, containers. Containers are very useful, very handy. Let's take a look at some. Very good ones are the box containers, VBox and HBox. Very handy. Let's use an HBox container, put our button in there. the HBox container. For now, I'm just going to give the full rectangle all the space. Now we can see here, the button in here has taken up one space on the left from top to bottom. Let's add a few more buttons to see why that matters, because the containers essentially resize their children. For the children, you don't have to worry about anchors anymore. Doesn't matter what you do with the anchors, you can't even click them anymore, but it doesn't matter what they were before. The container is gonna keep changing it, because this is now what decides the anchor of its children. Let's add a few buttons. And you can see here the HBox container very nicely puts its children next to each other, no matter what they are. They're just gonna be nicely aligned. There are a few things you can change. You can set the theme override constants and set a custom separation. Now the buttons are immediately next to each other. Now there's a bit more of a gap. So that's just some things you can customize. If we want to have the buttons up above each other instead of next to each other, we can do that. We can change the type of this HBox container into a VBox container. There we go. Now they're taking up all of that space. If we resize the HBox container, instead of keeping it on the auto thing, we can make our own layout on where the HBox container can go. There we go. I'm actually gonna take the anchors and keep them in the upper left corner. Now if we run this, on the default size it's in the upper left corner and it's gonna stay there. It's not gonna scale, it's not gonna change size, because that's how I set it. There we go. Buttons above each other. If we want to nest this, if we want an HBox inside of a VBox or whatever, we can do that. This here should be a VBox now. It doesn't rename them if you change the type, so you gotta do that yourself. If we add another HBox container, and we put the VBox container into the HBox container, and we tell the HBox container you can now use which space? You can now use this space here. And then we can duplicate this VBox container with all of its buttons a few times, and they go next to each other. Now you have a bit of a grid. Now this is a very nice grid, but there's a better way to do a grid. Because for grids there is a specific grid container node. Let's put buttons in here. I should probably give the buttons text. Let's delete these. Now currently all of the buttons are underneath each other still. That looks a lot like a VBox container. Kind of boring. Let's click the grid container and look at the settings. Here, columns. There's currently only one. Let's add a second one. There we go. Now there's a grid like whatever that is. Now there's 3, 4, 5. You can add as many columns as you want and it's gonna keep adding stuff underneath. We can duplicate all of these. We can add a lot of buttons in this grid. There we go. Each one of them is clickable. Each one of them can easily be connected to something. If we click this button here, and we double click on pressed here, we can attach it to a script. Currently nothing in here has a script. Let's add a script. Just to show this real quick. This is the same as it works in all of Godot, so it's not specific to UI nodes. But it's very convenient for UI nodes because you're gonna be using these signals a lot. Like every button you use in your game, you'll probably use the pressed or toggled or one of these signals at least. So here we can say add it to the control. There we go, script. Now we can say print button 1 clicked. There we go. We go in here. Select current, I don't care, I clicked the wrong thing. Click it. Button 1 clicked. There we go. Debug output works. If you don't want it anymore, disconnect. Code stays. You can use this for something else or delete it. Alright, back to the 2D view. Now these are some very useful nodes you can make a lot of stuff with. You can make user interfaces for an inventory system using the grid node. You can use a HBox node to have this little hotbar or whatever you call it, like in Stardew Valley, for example, or many games that have like skills at the bottom. MMORPGs usually do that. Something like that. Right, so besides buttons, you can also use stuff like a text edit. What does a text edit do? Let's make this bigger. Move it over here. Go into the preview. There we go, here's our text edit. We can type in this. You want to have a field to input information in a game? Here you go. Now you can input stuff. And this thing has a lot of signals you can use. And it has a text attribute here. So if you want to check in code what is the current text, you can do that as well. You can react to what people have been inputting. Another handy thing are progress bars. Now you have a texture version and an ordinary version. Let's take a look at the texture version because it's funnier. Move it over here so we can see it. Give it a texture. Let's see, what textures do we have? We have under, over, progress. Now under is just a background that always shows. Over is a foreground that always shows as an overlay. Progress is the one that actually moves and changes. Let's put a Godot icon into progress so we can see what happens. Now for progress we want to say that we have a current value, otherwise we see nothing. So our value is at 0. We have set min value and max value to 0 and 100 respectively. So let's go for 50 for 50%. There we go, that's half a Godot icon. We can move this around and have it more or less filled. But that is just one way for this to look like. We can also say that we want a different fill mode, and currently it's left to right. So left is 0, right is 100. We can do right to left and invert this. Top to bottom. Or clockwise. We can do this as a radial thing. So if we go here and we change the value, it does a bit of a clock thing. Of course, anti-clockwise, counterclockwise. There's a lot of options here. Here, now it fills from the middle. Very handy, allows you to build a health bar and stuff like that. That's a bit customized and more interesting than just straight up filling up. You'll have seen things like that in games before. Very quick, very easy to set up, just drag it in and good is. Of course, all of these things, no matter what you do, you can put it into containers. Here, you can put it into containers to make it fit into the layout you already have. See, we want this actually in here. There we go. Now the buttons are scaled a bit to make sure that they fit with the much larger Godot icon. And it all fits into a nice little grid. Let's take this back out again though. Nice to have it separate. In this particular case. Okay, now there are a few things that used to be control nodes but aren't anymore. If we go in here and we look for the viewport, then we'll see some children here. There's the window. There's also the sub viewport, which is very nice, but we're not using that right now. And here we have pop-ups, which you can customize with some data of your own, or you have dialogues. If we look in that, there are some children. Let's take a look at the file dialog because it has a lot of stuff going on. If we make this visible, you can see here that this file dialog actually lets you select a file directly. Okay, it has some signals to let you know what is currently selected, so you can read that. And you can just make this show up in a game and let people select files or let people select where they want to save the game, where they want to load a save file from, or whatever else it is you're doing. You can see here, save, open file, open multiple files, lots of options here you can use. What can we access? Everything potentially. If you set file system, you can access from anywhere. There's a lot of options here and you can basically preset what permissions people should have. Very convenient if you want people to access something like that. Just showing that here because it used to be a UI node and I'm sure people might need it sometimes. Now that's most of the important UI stuff covered, but let's take a look at what happens if we use UI nodes anywhere other than in a control. Let's make a new scene. Let's say we have a 2D scene, we have some 2D things in there like sprites, we have a Godot icon here and another one here, and this one's rotated a bit. Just, you know, a normal 2D scene, which I'm sure almost everyone is gonna have used at some point or another. Now what happens if we put a UI node in here? First of all, for starters, here the ordinary button, put some text in here, and indeed we can put the button anywhere and it's gonna just do its scaling thing the same way it did in the other window. So you can attach the button anywhere and it's just gonna be attached to the upper left screen right now. Sure, I don't really care what it's called, it's just a tutorial. See, their button is attached the same as everything else. If we want to move this button anywhere else in terms of scaling, it's not gonna let me do this. We can't move these anchors anywhere else right now. This is because this button is now set to exist essentially within the 2D world. If we want this to change, because currently it's gonna be a bit awkward if we want, like, say a UI at the bottom that shows us what our inventory is or whatever. It's a bit strange if that moves around with the screen, or if we were to go to the right now, like if we had a player and the player just walks off to the right, then these Godot icons wouldn't be visible anymore because they're off to the left somewhere, and this text, same as these icons, would just exist within the world, so it would just stay to the left somewhere. We can't see it anymore. We can change that. We can add a canvas layer. There we go, canvas layer. This here basically gives us a separate layer overlay that has nothing to do with the Node2D element anymore. The parent in this case doesn't matter. We just put the button in here. Okay, let's just use these two buttons here to showcase what happens. Now this one here, I can actually set the anchors to different places. So now if we have both of these, this one is gonna be anchored there at the bottom and it's gonna stay there. It kind of goes off screen here because it's in an awkward position like that, but all of this is possible. We can also put the anchor here in the middle, that way it can't change size. But as you can see, now this button here always stays right there in its exact position on screen, whereas this button stays right there in its position relative to other objects in the 2D world. So both of them are technically stationary, but relative to different things. Stationary on the screen, stationary within the world. Very convenient. This way you can have at the bottom here a UI for your inventory that always stays, or you can have a health bar at the upper left that always stays in the upper left. Stuff like that, you can just put it into a canvas layer and make sure it always stays where you want it to stay. You can build up the entire UI using the nodes we discussed in here. You can use all of these in here just as well. If we want to do this in 3D, it becomes even funkier, because now in 3D, if we put a button in here, it doesn't really work, does it? It's like it doesn't even show up, you can't even see it, because it doesn't have a dimension, it doesn't have a place it could exist in, not on its own. But if you put a canvas layer and put the button in there, then within the canvas layer the button makes sense. So if we go into this 3D world, then the button is still visible, even though this 3D space doesn't really align with anything. We can put a, just to visualize, a sprite 3D in here. Give it the Godot icon. I'll just rotate it a bit. Yeah, we don't have a camera right now, we are not looking at anything. Let's get a camera. There we go. Camera goes here. Camera sees stuff. Camera can look down a little as well. Good preview. That's what the camera sees. As you can see here, there's no UI node in the preview because the camera doesn't see that. But it's on a canvas layer, and the canvas layer gets drawn anyway. So while the camera sees this stuff here, our nicely rotated Godot, here's our button. We can still see it. If we move around the camera, it doesn't matter. It stays in the upper left corner. Now that's all of the most important stuff done, but one more thing I'm gonna make you aware of. All of this UI stuff currently has a default theme. The text can get a little bit blurry depending on what you look at. That's just the default font. We can change the font in a few different ways. It depends on if you want to change it for one button or for everything. Now what we can do is we can do a theme override. There's a lot of options here. We can say we want the font to be a different color. Now that is an override for this one button. So this one button now has a different font color. There's a bunch of other things you can change here. You can just click through this, change font, whatever. Let's actually change the font real quick just to show how that looks like. We can't do that because we don't have a font yet, so let's do that. Let's grab a font from Google Fonts. There we go, Google Fonts. We can download a font. We can save it to a different tutorial. Let's see, this is the UI tutorial. There we go, that's the Godot project. Put it in there, sure, zip file, fine. Grab the folder, grab it over here, make sure this actually exists. Extract to Tico. There it is. Font data, go in there. There we go, now we have a font that looks different. We can set some data on this, we can set it to, let's see, font size. We can tell it to be a much bigger font. Now this one button is flooding out everything else because it's enormous. Let's maybe make it not quite as big. 100. Nice. Nice big text. We can do other stuff like give it an outline. I should not do that so quickly. There we go. Now it has an outline. Colors. So those are all theme overrides. You can set a lot of stuff here. But that's just for one button. And that's gonna stay for one button unless you duplicate this button, and then both buttons are gonna have that, but that's not. Instead, what you can do is you can go into the actual theme, and you can use a theme that you want to apply to a certain group of things. Then you can save the theme and per drag and drop attach it to multiple things. So let's give it a shot. Just to see. So this theme can customize basically everything about what your UI looks like. Let's, for example, we are working with a button. Let's select this button here. So we go on the little picker icon, click the button, then it shows up here on the left. We can say override everything to make sure that we can actually change stuff. So if we want to go here, we can go into the font, and there's the default font, which is Open Sans, semi-bold, whatever. I forgot which one I had clicked. I'll just disable the theme override. So we can use the first one. Go into the theme again, make theme. Now if we want our font file, we just select, drag it here, put it in there. There we go. Now we have overridden the button with this font. If we want the font size or whatever, there are all of these settings in here. Where was the size? Size is here. Let's make it bigger. It looks a bit neater when it's bigger too. Make 50. 50 is nice. Okay, here's our font. We could color it and do all kinds of things. We can change the style depending on whether it's clicked on or whatever. We're not gonna do all of that right now. There's a lot of settings to go through. But just to see, now we have a theme. If we want this theme saved and used to other things, we can just save it as a file. New theme, yeah, whatever, .tis. TIES are basically our resource files we can use to keep information saved and use it in different nodes. Save it. Here it is, with a nice little icon. And now if we go into any other button, like let's take this button here, and we want to go into the theme, and we take this and we drag it into the theme, then all settings we changed on this apply to this now as well. So this way you can make different themes and just have them apply to a bunch of stuff. You can set a default theme. Let's see, GUI theme, there is the custom theme. So if you want to have a theme file like this created that modifies a bunch of different UI elements and you don't want to apply to every single thing, put in a custom UI thing here. And there you go. Now if we create something new, it's gonna apply to that automatically. It doesn't need a restart. Okay, let's try it. Let's go and new button and some text. And you can see here immediately the button already uses the new theme we applied. So this is how you can customize everything. This is going to take some testing around, but I think the Godot 4 UI, Godot 3 already, but Godot 4 just has a few little improvements still. And it just makes it very, very quick and easy to get started, have a good solid prototype for your UI, and then you can spend as much time polishing it as you like. Alright, that will be all for today. Bye. Not really sure why you're still here. Video's over, but let me know what your favorite rock is. You know, like this one's quite nice.